Today, we're diving into the extraordinary life and heartbreaking end of Tom Petty, a rock and roll legend whose music inspired millions. From his humble beginnings in Florida to his rise as one of the most influential artists in music history, Petty's journey was filled with triumphs, struggles, and a relentless dedication to his craft. But behind the hits and iconic performances lay untold stories of resilience, heartbreak, and a tragic final chapter. Join us as we uncover the life and legacy of the man who taught us all to never back down. Born on October 20th, 1950 in Gainesville, Florida, Thomas Earl Petty came into the world under circumstances as unglamorous as you can imagine. Gainesville, while known for its lush wetlands and sunny skies, was no Los Angeles or Nashville when it came to nurturing rock and roll dreams. Petty's mother, Kitty, worked at the local tax office and did her best to keep family life on an even keel. His father, Earl, was a vastly different character, one described by those who knew him as someone who could flare into anger at the slightest provocation. He had a penchant for drinking, gambling, and he was not above dishing out emotional or physical turmoil when he felt challenged. Growing up, Petty's younger brother Bruce quickly learned to blend in by adopting their father's interests, such as playing sports, following the rules, and keeping his head down. Tom, by contrast, was a quiet, artsy kid with a love for music, drawing, and television. In Earl's eyes, this made Tom different, and different was not something that earned you a pat on the back. By the time most kids were watching Father Knows Best on TV, Tom was drawing a very different conclusion about fatherhood. His father definitely did not fit the kind and nurturing template that 1950s television sitcoms promised. Instead, Earl loomed over the household like a tyrant, and Tom's attempts to find solace at home typically ended in heartbreak. Feeling stifled, Tom would seek refuge in front of the television, which provided him a window into a world beyond his chaotic family life. He got glimpses of places like California, sun-soaked, shimmering with promise, and seemingly a million miles away from the tension in Gainesville. Even as a kid, Tom had a spark in his heart that whispered, "That's where you belong." If there was a single spark that ignited Petty's passion for music, it might have been the day he encountered Elvis Presley. You could call it destiny, or just good luck, but around 1961, Tom's uncle, who worked on film sets, brought young Tom to see Elvis during the filming of Follow That Dream. Watching the King at work was awe-inspiring. Elvis exuded everything that Tom didn't see in his own life: fun, freedom, confidence, and the raw magnetism that left entire crowds breathless. Struck by this revelation, Tom rushed home and bartered his slingshot for a stack of Elvis records. Not too long after, the Beatles took to the Ed Sullivan Show, forever changing the landscape of popular music. For countless youths across the country, including Tom Petty, it was as if the door to creative possibility had been blown wide open. He described that moment as seeing something that looked like so much fun, and he simply knew he could do it, too. By 16, he was already gigging with a local group called the Epics, and though they didn't storm the charts, the embryonic seeds of stardom were undeniably there. Yet, in typical teenage fashion, Petty also dabbled in all the usual pitfalls of adolescence: parties, late nights, and even a few drug experiences that left him, by his own admission, with a sense that if he really wanted to accomplish anything, he needed to focus, and focus hard. After one particularly disorienting, psychedelic trip, Petty had a moment of clarity that convinced him if he wanted to break out of Gainesville, it had to be through music. Petty's efforts culminated in a band called Mudcrutch, formed with fellow Gainesville musicians who shared his hunger for something more. They built up a reputation in local clubs, creating the beginnings of a cult following. and recorded a demo they hoped would catch the right person's ear. Sure enough, a label in Los Angeles took interest, giving Petty and his bandmates that magical sense of validation. They loaded their equipment into a Volkswagen camper and set off on a cross-country pilgrimage, living out a fantasy that thousands of dreamers can only imagine. They traveled with minimal money, little more than their instruments and a few personal belongings. They did, however, have a stash of marijuana for the ride, hidden so creatively that a suspicious Texas officer who tore their van apart never found it. Once in L.A., the first music executive to hear their tape listened for all of 30 seconds before proclaiming it wasn't worth his time. Petty later recognized just how extraordinary it was that they even got that meeting in the first place. After all, here they were, a scrappy rock band from Florida, completely unproven beyond their small local fan base, expecting to wow Hollywood. But they didn't let one disheartening reaction stop them, and soon they discovered that 3 labels were, in fact, interested. This was the best news any of them could have hoped for. Petty couldn't wait to race back home to Florida and deliver the update, not just to his bandmates, but also to a certain special someone. Her name was Jane Benyo, a tall, blonde, fiercely intelligent Gainesville native. She and Petty had been dating on and off for about a year and a half, and by the time the Mudcrutch LA trip promised real success on the horizon, she decided to make her move. From her perspective, Tom was on the brink of stardom, and she wanted to make sure she wasn't left behind. Tired of the uncertainty of their on-again, off-again relationship, Benyo enlisted the help of Petty's mother and grandmother to nudge him toward marriage. A devout Christian, Petty's mom believed marriage was the best possible choice for her 24-year-old rock and roller son. So she and Benyo joined forces in orchestrating what might kindly be called a gentle ambush. On the way to the ceremony, a panic-stricken Petty actually jumped out of the moving car, but his mother's tearful pleas convinced him to hop back in and go through with the wedding. Even the newlyweds' arrival in L.A. held a twist. The very first night, Benyo confessed she was pregnant. Petty was stunned, but not entirely surprised. Looking back, he guessed his mother had probably known all along. Despite the upheaval in his personal life, Petty kept his eye on the prize. Mudcrutch managed to secure a record deal, but it didn't exactly go as planned. Their initial single fizzled, lacking the spark to climb the charts, and the band found themselves adrift. Undeterred, Petty regrouped with 2 former Mudcrutch members, Mike Campbell and Benmont Tench, recruiting Stan Lynch and Ron Blair to form a new band, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. This lineup had a harder edge, a tighter musical synergy, and Petty's lyrics grew sharper, more confident. Yet while Petty devoted himself to the Heartbreakers' first album, Jane was left in Gainesville with their child, feeling more like a footnote in his story than a partner in his success. The Heartbreakers' self-titled debut dropped in 1976. Though it didn't explode in the United States overnight, it grabbed attention abroad, particularly in the UK, where Petty's raw style found early and enthusiastic adopters. Gradually, American audiences took notice as well. Petty, with his scruffy blonde hair and unassuming stage presence, projected a sense of quiet rebellion that resonated deeply with the late 1970s era. He soon received his first genuine royalty check and rewarded himself with a Camaro. Finally, a piece of tangible proof that all his years of grinding might be worth it. In 1979, Petty's label contract was transferred to MCA, a move that Petty staunchly opposed. He saw it as being bought and sold like a commodity, and he wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. Desperate to regain control over his music, Petty did the unthinkable. He filed for bankruptcy as a strategic gambit. This was a high-stakes move, the kind that could ruin a band's momentum entirely. But to Petty, artistic integrity meant everything. The legal battles that followed were intense. Lawyers scrutinized his finances and even demanded details about how many guitars he owned. With his signature deadpan humor, Petty replied he had a red one and a black one, sending the judge into a fit of laughter. Eventually, MCA realized that if they pushed too far, Petty could walk away and leave them with nothing. They caved, granting him a more favorable deal. The result of that standoff was Damn the Torpedoes, released in 1979 and packed with the band's first major wave of hits, like Refugee and Here Comes My Girl. The album soared to triple platinum status, affirming that Petty's stubborn stand had been the right one. However, while he was out on tour promoting his triumph, Petty was juggling a much darker, more personal battle. His mother, Kitty, was gravely ill. She had dealt with health issues for a long time, cancer and epilepsy, but her condition took a sharp turn for the worse, just as her son was in the throes of stardom. Petty would break from touring to visit her, only to find a heartbreaking scene. Well-intentioned hospital staff had plastered her entire room with clippings of Tom and the band, perhaps thinking it would comfort her. Instead, it only reminded him of how fame had driven a wedge between them. He felt guilty, knowing he had been away when she needed him most. Once she passed, he chose not to attend her funeral, a decision he later regretted deeply. More trouble awaited Petty at home. Jane, already struggling with the demands of being a rock star's wife and mother, began exhibiting signs of substance abuse and serious mental health issues. One night, Petty came home from a grueling studio session to find her passed out on the floor. At first, a friend dismissed it as drunkenness, but Petty sensed something more serious was at play. In a desperate attempt to keep the family together, mirroring what his own mother had done with Earl, Petty decided that having another child might help. Their second daughter, Anna Kim, arrived in 1982. But her birth didn't dispel the demons haunting Jane. Things escalated in 1987 when Petty's house in Encino, California, went up in flames. He had been trying to unwind with his family when he woke to the smell of smoke. Reacting swiftly, he ushered them outside, even telling them to jump into the pool if the flames got too intense. With the fire department on the way, Petty tried to battle the blaze with a garden hose, which melted in his hands from the heat. The family's housekeeper, also attempting to help, ended up catching fire and had to douse herself. By the time firefighters extinguished the flames, the property was almost a total loss. Damages were estimated at over $1 million. Then came the most disturbing detail of all. Arson investigators determined that someone had deliberately poured lighter fluid around the house and started the blaze. Petty would later channel this horrifying incident into one of his most famous songs, I Won't Back Down. Though many fans assume it's a generic anthem about perseverance, Petty privately revealed its roots in the terror of that night. Despite these traumas, Tom Petty's public persona remained notoriously laid back, like a man who had everything figured out. But in truth, he wrestled with crippling anxiety, particularly stage fright. Before almost every show, he experienced stomach pains and even vocal problems, fearing he couldn't live up to fans' lofty expectations. Years earlier, he had discovered that being that star on stage, someone who seemed so unflappably cool, didn't always mesh with the neurotic intensity that consumed him behind the scenes. He would often joke with his daughters that he wasn't truly calm or cool. He was as wound up and anxious as anyone, if not more so. Eventually, his marriage to Jane deteriorated beyond repair. Her downward spiral with addiction and mental health struggles, coupled with Petty's unrelenting schedule, left them both on emotional fumes. The 1994 solo album Wildflowers, often hailed as one of Petty's most deeply personal and creatively rewarding works, was in many ways a preamble to their inevitable divorce, which was finalized in 1996. For Petty, 1996 was a year of stark transition. Not only was he legally free from a marriage that had caused him immense pain, but he also crossed paths with Dana York, a school teacher he met at a Johnny Cash concert. He was captivated by her warmth and intelligence, quickly asking for her phone number. Dana had no idea the extent of Petty's inner darkness, or how deeply the scars from his first marriage still ran. Even as he moved forward with Dana, Petty found himself lured into a new, yet all too familiar, vice: heroin. It started small, just enough to dull the emotional wreckage, but soon escalated. Remarkably, he hid it well. So well, in fact, that even those closest to him didn't suspect anything. Yet his behavior grew erratic during the recording of Echo in 1999, an album suffused with a somber tone that many fans interpreted as a reflection of heartbreak and regret. Sensing something was wrong, producer Rick Rubin stepped in. Unable to watch his friend destroy himself, Rubin contacted Petty's family behind his back, alerting them to his drug use. Though Petty initially felt betrayed, this intervention became the catalyst for what happened next: rehab. Dana, who had grown up with an addicted father, recognized the signs and stood by Petty's side through the entire grueling process. She offered him the understanding he had never fully found in his first marriage. Petty later admitted that she saved his life by refusing to walk away when he was at his worst. By 2001, Petty was clean, and the couple tied the knot in a low-key Las Vegas ceremony attended by about 20 close friends and family members. Symbolically, it was squeezed in between tour dates, a nod to the life Petty knew he could never fully escape: the endless road, the fans, the music. Fast forward to 2016, a moment when Tom Petty was 66 years old and looking ahead to the Heartbreakers' 40th anniversary tour. By that time, the band was practically an institution. They'd been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, sold more than 80 million records, collaborated with luminaries like Bob Dylan and George Harrison in the Traveling Wilburys, and left an indelible mark on American rock music. Yet Petty himself was hardly coasting. During rehearsals for the tour, he slipped and fractured his hip. Under normal circumstances, that might mean postponing shows, particularly for an artist with his track record, who could likely have convinced fans to wait a few months. But Petty insisted on pressing forward, playing over 50 shows despite excruciating pain. The reason, as Dana explained, was largely about loyalty. Hundreds of people, from stagehands to sound mixers to tour bus drivers, counted on those shows for their livelihood. Petty believed he owed it to them, as well as to his band and fans, to push through. He also battled knee problems, pneumonia, and a surge of anxiety and insomnia during that time, all without letting it show on stage. By the tour's end, Petty's pain was unbearable. His doctor broke the harsh news that the hip had fully broken under the strain of all those performances. For Tom Petty, it must have felt like the final betrayal from a body that had already endured so much. As fate would have it, that same day on October 1st, 2017, he collapsed at his home in Malibu. Dana discovered him unresponsive, frantically dialed 911 and tried CPR. For a fleeting moment, it appeared he might rally as he began breathing a bit, but the hope was tragically short-lived. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but there was no brain activity. Surrounded by family, friends, and longtime bandmates, he was taken off life support on October 2nd, 2017, and passed at 8:40 p.m. He was only 66 years old. The coroner's report later revealed that Petty had numerous drugs in his system, including fentanyl and oxycodone, which he had apparently been using to manage his overwhelming pain. Dana and Petty's daughter, Adria, released a statement affirming that they believed his death to be a tragic accident, a result of the physical agony from his injuries, combined with the emotional stress of fulfilling his obligations. It was a devastating coda to a life that had been defined by perseverance and grit. One couldn't help but note the bitter irony. Petty, who had once declared he wouldn't back down, had pushed himself to the edge for the people who depended on him, only to be undone by the consequences of that very determination. After his passing, tributes poured in. Heartbroken fans, fellow musicians, and younger artists who credited Petty as a monumental influence offered their respects. In 2023, the timelessness of his music was evident once more when his 1980s track, Love is a Long Road, was featured in the long-awaited Grand Theft Auto 6 trailer. The song promptly skyrocketed to the number 2 spot on the charts, introducing yet another wave of young listeners to Petty's unmistakable sound. More tributes followed, a soulful country cover at the 2024 Country Music Awards, and a feature spot in a Snoop Dogg album that December, an unlikely collaboration that would have undoubtedly made Petty grin at the sheer range of his posthumous influence. Perhaps that's the ultimate testament to Tom Petty. His songs transcend time, genre, and generational divides. They speak to heartbreak, rebellion, resilience, and the understated heroism of simply refusing to let life's tragedies define you. From American Girl to Free Fall into I Won't Back Down, each track is a reflection of a man who struggled with deeply rooted anxieties, who stood up to corporate giants when it mattered, who overcame addictions, who braved painful relationships, and who continued making music until his body literally broke under the strain. Tom Petty once said that rock and roll was a refuge for the misfits and the rebels, a world that could offer sanctuary to those who didn't fit the mold. He found his sanctuary in music and invited millions of people along for the ride, leaving behind anthems that resonate with anyone who's ever felt cornered by life's tribulations. We might never know who torched his house or how he truly felt about having to hide his addictions for so long, but we do know how much he valued honesty in his art. If his father taught him anything, it was the determination not to let your environment dictate your destiny. If his mother taught him anything, it was the importance of kindness and empathy, traits that shone through in how he treated both fans and fellow musicians. And if his marriages, both successful and disastrous, taught him anything, it was that love, while messy, is what ultimately redeems us. If you found Tom Petty's story as compelling as his music, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more in-depth looks at the lives of music's greatest legends. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.